Hi, and welcome to Homage, the channel on history and board games. We are just a tiny bit late, and people are already complaining in the chat. I mean, come on, it's okay. 4 minutes. 4 minutes is fine. I've done worse. But yeah, it's great to have you watching us tonight. Thanks a lot for that. Really looking forward to the questions in the chat. And tonight we're going to be playing about the next issue in the Men of Iron series called Ermine. It's going to be issue 7. It's currently on P500. And if you're interested, I added the link to the P500 page in the description. And I have with me tonight to talk about this a new iteration of the Men of Iron, not iteration, but like new chapter, or I don't know how to call it, in the Men of Iron series, Pierre Vagneur Jones, who's the designer of this module, young designer. I believe it's going to be your first published design.
Yes,
so
right.
yeah. And you might know that Pierre is also a frequent co-host on the channel. So that's a bit weird. So there is definitely a bias here. Pierre is part of the extended universe. And you might ask, it's weird. Fred never does a preview of P500 games. And when Pierre does a game, it's like, yeah, if you want to be on my channel, you better be my friend. That's the way it is. And if you're not happy, you can watch another channel. So that's all I have to say. No, but it's really cool. Thanks, Pierre, for taking the time. Salut, Olivier. Yeah, actually, I just want to note something. I think it's really important for people to realize that both Pierre and I are French. We could be doing this video in French.
It could be.
And I would like you to be thankful because we're doing it in English, using a substandard language that has no poetry, that is a bit boring. We could do it in something that is so much exciting and talking about French history in French. But we love you guys so much that we're doing it in English. So a bit of love, sharing the love, I think would be nice. I don't know what you think about it, Pierre, but
well, I had to talk Fred down from doing it in French, so
yeah.
So we can switch halfway through if people are being mean.
Yeah,
so.
Actually, if we start disagreeing on Men of Iron, because I'm known for not liking the system that much, we might argue in French. So I hope that's okay. But anyway, I see that there's quite a few of you in the chat. Thanks everyone for being here. Maybe to start with, Pierre, for people who wouldn't know you, could you maybe briefly present yourself and explain how you got into wargame design and wargaming in general?
Yeah, sure. So I am Pierre. I live in England, but I am also French. I started wargaming when I was pretty young because obviously we played Risk and everything at home, but I played Stratego with my mum mainly and my brother. And I really liked Stratego. It's a really fun game for when you're a kid. Didn't really wargame much after that. I got gifted a copy of Memoir 44. Yeah,
just one thing about Stratego. I think it's really important to say a couple of things about Stratego. Stratego gets a lot of hate for being a bit of a simplistic, basic game and everything. First of all, it was a design that was done more than a century ago. It was done by a French woman. Amazing design originally. And for me, it is the foundation of all block war games.
So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, Stratego is so influential. Such a cool system.
That is why I started playing it when I was 6, because of those facts.
Exactly, because of those facts.
I saw the Columbia game system with the block games, and I really wanted to get that foundation and the history behind it before starting. So yeah, when I was 6 or 7, that's why I started with that.
Makes total sense. Makes total sense.
I got a copy of Memoir 44 in French, which was a bit frustrating because I lived in England and no one could play it with me. And then I guess it was until university where people on my course, I did ancient medieval history and then medieval studies for my master's. And on my course, we were looking for a game that would simulate medieval battles. And actually, the Men of Iron Tri-Pack was my first hex encounter war game that's a proper modern war game. And haven't looked back really. I've been get really into hex encounter games, CGs, but this is my first love.
And you never played the Vaivictis series, Au fil de l'épée?
I have played it since. Yeah.
Okay, because I think it's probably one of the best entry points into tactical hex and counter wargaming, and also probably the simpler system to get into medieval. But yeah.
Yeah, I think Au fil de l'épée is really good, and if it's hard, because it's quite hard to get these days. So I would recommend if someone wants a simpler version than Men of Iron, or at least a more accessible version, Amabel Holland's Shield and Sword series is fantastic, and I think a really, really good system. to get into that sort of medieval tactical combat on a similar scale as Men of Iron. I like Men of Iron slightly more, but that is a really, really, really good series as well.
And yeah, don't get me wrong. I think Men of Iron is first of all, there is a lot more content in Men of Iron. So if you invest your time into learning the system, you have access to more battles. So that's the first thing, and it's a bit more detailed and a bit more refined. But I think, yeah, Au fil de l'épée is a cool system.
Really
and if I can promote a bit Vaivictis, which is the best magazine, wargaming magazine in the world, I think it's okay.
It's okay, and it's also half the price of every other wargaming magazine.
Yeah, exactly.
Get,
with
so
the art, with actually games that have been playtested most of the time, so you can actually play them, and they are not like awful rules. So it's a like the fact that they release on every 2 months a decent war game, sometimes really good, and have
on a real variety of subjects as well. Usually,
yeah, it's pretty nice. It's pretty impressive. And no débat, it shouldn't be in Breton because I'm a Jacobin, and there is only French in France. But anyway, so this is how you got into wargaming. So that's really cool. And let's talk a bit about specifically Ermine. So I think it's pretty cool to have your first love as a system and have it as your first release. What made you want to cover the topic that you cover, and maybe explain a bit what the topic is?
Sure. Yeah. So I just, as like a preamble as well, when I say I'm half French, I'm half Breton on that side of the family. So my cousins all live in Brittany. My parents currently live in Brittany in a town called Josselin, right in the middle of Brittany. So I go there quite a lot. I go there at least sort of twice a year. And so because I was visiting there in Josselin, the village where my parents live, right next door to it, about 10-minute walk down the road, there's a monument to a battle called the Battle of the 30. Which is really interesting, sort of like piqued my curiosity. And it's where 30 knights on the French side and 30 knights on the English side decided to fight. During this war that I knew some about, the 100 Years' War, but not that much about at the time. So I read into it, realized that the War of Breton Succession is super interesting. It's at this sort of early stage of the 100 Years' War. 100 Years' War starts in 1337, and the War of Breton Succession within it starts in 1341. Essentially, the Duke of Brittany dies, and there are two people vying for the throne of the Duchy of Brittany. One is backed by the French, one is backed by the English. So it ends up being this sort of proxy war between France and England. And it's super interesting in how it develops. It takes a good 23 years to actually end. A lot of back and forth. Both leaders of both sides, like the leaders of both sides, get captured by the other side. And there are some pretty. What interested me in getting into this game design is that every battle is actually pretty interesting. And there's something interesting going on either with the terrain or with the forces or even the time of day that the battle happens. And I wanted to, so I thought that this was the perfect system to show that in, because it gets funky in the system. You know, you can really like bend it, and it's quite malleable to good scenario rules.
I think it's really cool to focus on those battles, especially as they seem really interesting. And we're going to go in detail through the battles, and Pierre is going to explain a bit of history behind each of them, why they were picked, and we're going to look into Vassal, how they're depicted in the game.
Yeah.
But when you talk about this, the fact that it's a proxy war during the 100 Years' War, I have to ask the question: Do you do you have the intent at some point, or did you have the idea in the back of your mind to make maybe something that is a bit more on a strategic level? So you have this diplomatic aspect of the War of Succession being depicted, or you think it doesn't fit?
I think it fits, but also it's been done quite a few times. It's been done in Vaivictis, a really good game on that. Quite a while ago, it's quite hard to get your hands on. But recently, there's a game called Breton's 1341. It's only in French, frustratingly, but it's really, really good, and really good on that strategic level. Where I feel like I don't have much to say at that level, whereas the battles in this, only 2 of them have been gamed before, of the 6 battles. Like the other 4, I've not actually seen in a war game, or at least I've not played in a war game just yet. So that's kind of why I wanted to get into that. Oh, also, can I jump in? Brian R. Smith in the chat saying, "Why is the table title named after a weasel?" So, Fred, I can't hear you if you've muted yourself. But an Ermine is a weasel in French, and the coat of arms of Brittany is Ermines. It's a sort of type of heraldry, which is lots of weasels stuck to a white wall. I don't actually have a picture of it just on hand, but yeah, that's
you have to trust Pierre about this. And Winter Quartering, by the way, awesome channel, is saying that the game is De Bretagne by Victis.
Yes,
so it's
exactly that.
But I think
really good.
it was released. Was it released before they had actually mounted counters?
Yes, it was. So it's unmounted, and it has cards as well that are pretty thin. So it's like production-wise, it sucks, but it's a good game. It's a very good game. Philippe gave it to me, so thank you, Philippe.
And that would be great. I think there are some of those Victis games that were really interesting that probably would deserve a better production and a release. So that would be, I think so. That might be one of those.
It could really fit.
Yeah.
But yeah, really interesting war. Sort of a vignette of the 100 Years' War, and that's
okay.
Sort of.
And I really like this idea of focusing on stuff that haven't been depicted. I think it's really cool. Should we jump into the small presentation that you prepared?
Yeah,
and we can start talking about the game a bit more in detail. And by the way, Alexandre Fontaine-Rousseau managed to do it, so we're going to shift the stream to French because for political reason, Alexandre doesn't wish to speak English, which is fair. Donc, du coup, Ermine.
On peut continuer, c'est comme ça.
Oui, on continue en français. J'espère que c'est bon pour tout le monde.
So actually, if you see the guy's shield on the right with the red stripe through it, I know it's a bit blurry, the picture. They are the white and black bits just on either side of that line are Ermines. That's what the shield and heraldry looks like. So essentially, Men of Iron, published by GMT. The series design was by Richard Berg. Richard Berg, late great Richard Berg, who died I think in 2018, began the series and has one of the most prolific designers I have ever seen. A lot of his games are really weird in a good way. Currently, the series honcho is Ralph Charlton, and the developer for this game is Jason Lindsay. He's been amazing. He's really, really good. The game itself and the game system itself is sort of the grand tactical level where if people aren't familiar with it, you're looking at the battle from a bird's eye view, where you have usually 3 or more wings of your army who you activate in turn to go and fight the enemy wings of each army. Lots of maneuver, lots of freedom in that maneuver, and lots of die rolling, which can create some chaos on the battlefield.
And I would say lots of DRMs, which is
lots of DRMs, but if you're not a big baby,
annoys me to the highest point.
But if you're not a big baby, Fred, like it's easy. But that's Richard Berg, and he says a lot through those die roll modifiers, which I like, and I think is not to some people's tastes. I would stress, try this game, see if it clicks with you, and if it doesn't, that's fine. Or try a game in the Men of Iron series, genuinely. I mean, what I like about it is that everyone is called Jean. Everyone who matters is either called Jean or Charles. There are, on top of these people, so Jean of Montfort the Fourth, maybe, and then Jean of Montfort the Fourth and the Fifth, maybe. His wife, Jeanne of Flanders, and then Jeanne de Penthièvre and Charles de Blois. They are the main people in this conflict over the 20 years. It's really done on the two sides of the Blois faction and the Montfort faction. The Montforts are the English-backed, the Blois are the French-backed. But there are loads of other characters in this sort of war that keep recurring throughout the 100 Years' War and like the 50 years after, well after this conflict has ended, which is why also I find this super interesting. You know, like you'll read something about the 1370s or 1380s and you realize that this knight here who's won this battle then was present in these battles back then as well. And there's this sort of line that you can draw. Like Bertrand de Guesclin, he's maybe the most well-known one in France. He's one of the 9 worthies in France, like the ideal of the knight. His first battles were in the War of Breton Succession. Plenty of other people, though. I'm not going to go through them. I have the whole list. There's Genoese crossbowmen who recur and are at the Battle of Crécy as well later on. They're here as well. It's fascinating, I think. And this is, and Fred, I don't know if you agree, but like hex and counter games, because I know you like Combat Commander as a hex and counter game.
Yeah.
I think the attraction of those games is the narrative that you can make behind it. And the sort of, not necessarily cinematic, but the sort of stories you can tell through the different actions that happen throughout the game. And I think having all these characters within like this Men of Iron entry, where you can get to know them throughout the battles because they always recur, really helps tell that narrative quite well, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's so what I would like in Hex and Counter game are two things. Some of them have this emerging narrative that I really like, and this is why I like games that are on a smaller scale, like the things that are in the Cry Havoc system, for example. I think is a good example of that, like the Sherwood game.
For sure.
Yeah, I think we're gonna play it with Stuart in the near future, which is a simplified version of the Cry Havoc system, and you really tell a story on the board. And I think that going back to our discussion on Legion of Honor, the frontier between role playing and wargaming is a bit like tenuous when you're
blurred,
it's really blurred, and I like this. And then the other thing that I like about Hex and Counter wargame is understanding the like material aspect of a battle, understanding why some decisions were made, and understand, okay, this is what happened, and that works at that works at any scale. That makes them more geographical game almost than historical games in a way. I think it's quite interesting. Before you keep on with the history, I think I would like just to take a few questions from the chat, because there are a few questions that are all going in the same direction regarding maybe some of the additions that you made to the system. So we've got a question from, I'm going to go through all of them because they all go in the same direction. Molotov Kokatiel, who's asking, he's interested to see if you brought any new rules in the series, or did you stick with what's already there? Alexandre Fontaine-Rousseau, a question that I really like, did you add some brand new DRMs? I want to know about it. Yes, that would be pretty cool. And yeah, the idea is Board Game Chronicle was saying also great channel. If you don't go in there and subscribe,
blog as well.
Really cool. Yeah, excellent blog too. Questions around what did you do with the system?
Yeah, sure. So with the system, Ralph, who is the series honcho, he has wanted to keep the sort of series rulebook intact. It kind of works to the advantage of this game specifically, because the original Men of Iron was made to sort of represent that first phase of the 100 Years' War, with the exception of Agincourt at the end of it. But it's really meant to show that sort of rise of infantry. That's what the rules reflect. That's where it shines. And with Ermine being in 1341 to 1364, that's what it's showing, right? It's the same thesis as those first rules. So those first rules I'm not touching because Ralph doesn't want me to. And in response to Alexandre, no, I'm not going to be changing any DRMs. However, the thing I really liked with Richard Berg's designs or his entries in the series are the amount of scenario special rules that are both mandatory but also optional throughout all of the scenarios, and his sort of like, I guess, annotated bibliography that goes on with them. So I'm really laying it on thick with the scenario special rules and making it so each battle feels really unique. Each battle really represents what was going on in that battle, and it provides a different experience and really sort of helps flavor that narrative as well. So that's where the rules weight sort of gets added in the scenario special rules, where you can add them or not, like they're optional. I would say use as many as you can because they're fun, but rather than the core series rules, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, and that they are optional is really nice. So if you're just getting into the system, you can play the core system. And then if you really want to get a feel for what makes those battles unique, then you play with the special rules. That's exactly. That's very cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's go back into the presentation. Sorry for the interruption.
No, that's fine. Just a quick sort of going over what the battles actually are. It's going to have 6 battles, which is pretty in line with other entries. They usually have 6 or 7, but these are all on full-size maps. So that's why we went with 6, rather than being able to split up one map into 2 and have 7. Whilst they're all pretty close run things, each battle, like every single one of them could have gone either way. The Montfortis faction wins most of them, wins 4 of them. I've added Cocherel at the end. It's not part of the War of the Breton Succession, because almost every character that fights in that battle also fought during the War of Breton Succession. And it was a lot more interesting than any of the other skirmishes that I could find during that war. There are only 5 major battles during this war, right? So it's a pretty low conflict, if that makes sense. It's mostly sort of impactful sieges that pepper throughout different skirmishes and battles. I'll cover I'll go over a couple here where, like, Chanteauceau, the very first battle is where John de Montfort gets captured, and then his son has to sort of carry on the war after him. Morlaix is maybe more of a classic men of iron battle where an outnumbered English force is against incoming French force. It's a good solo battle to learn the system where you don't have to maneuver much with one side, but you do have to like pick away at different flanks, and you do have an option of going around different flanks with that battle, which is quite interesting. And I mean, we can dive deeper maybe into the other ones.
Yeah.
Like the historiography of certain battles and how I wanted to like represent them, because there is a differing agreement in the historiography of, say, the Battle of Moron. Like the left map here represents kind of the French historiographic agreement, I'd say, and the right map shows the English point of view. I don't know if you can see my mouse on the screen. I'm not sure if you can, but
no, I don't think we can. No,
that's all right. But you can see that on the French.
I think you can probably you should have a laser pointer option in Sheets, I think.
It's fine. Don't worry. I'll just describe. So the French is going essentially north to south on the battlefield, and the battlefield is an open plain, whereas the English historiography in this book, Fred, if you can if you can point to me, in this book, great book, but the English historiography say that they're going east to west. That's really interesting because it fundamentally changes how the battle goes out. If it's east to west, they're going up a hill, they're crossing this stream. If they're going north to south, it's an open plain. So the description of the battle really matters. So obviously I'm going to be putting scenarios for both interpretations to show which battle you want to fight and how you want to fight it. I mean, interestingly, the battle on the right here, this is a map drawn by Alfred Byrne. It's completely wrong. Like that river isn't there. That river is completely different shape. It's a stream. That castle, we're not sure if Brenbilly Castle down there is there, and that hill is extremely steep, so really hard to get up. So they probably didn't attack from there. I personally would more sort of agree to the French interpretation, but I kind of want to have both because why not?
So that's really interesting. So you don't make a statement on what you think the right.
I will be making a statement on what I think the right interpretation is, but I want to include both interpretations because I want it to be sort of like, because I've read all of the primary history source material we have, and from that I would agree with the French interpretation. However, every English book I've seen and read so far on the English side that isn't necessarily dealing with as much primary sources agrees on this sort of other interpretation. And I think that's an interesting thing to at least show and talk about and be aware of within the game. Like I don't feel the need to go heavily down on one side or the other, even though I might mention that in my design notes.
And do you have an idea of why the British interpretation is wrong? The reason why it is wrong.
My assumption would be that Alfred Byrne, really good historian. Get this book if you can. It's a fantastic book. It's really cheap, and it's the best English/only English language book on this war. So it's really, really good. Get it? It's cheap. But I think he's very used to looking at English battles during this period in the 100 Years' War, where it was an English force defending against an overwhelming French force. The English were on a hill. The English, like shot with their longbows and saved the day. And I think that might be why he's sort of like defaulting to that position, because we don't have that many sources on it. I also think he ignored several pretty key sources. Like he doesn't mention any crossbowmen at all.
Yeah.
Whereas I've looked and I saw that crossbowmen, like one of the primary sources was the Doria brothers, who were the Genoese crossbowmen running away from this battle, and their notes on that. So it's interesting, to like figure out why. And I'm sort of in the camp of why not show both, and because that's history, right? That's the practice of history, is exploring these potentials, exploring why, and this is wargaming as well, exploring the counterfactual of why someone would attack from a certain point or why someone would attack from a different point, and that sort of thing.
And do you feel like your game does maybe a good demonstration as to why one interpretation is probably more valid than the other, in the sense that when you play them out, you realize that one interpretation is probably unrealistic because of the outcome?
So yeah, I think it does a decent job at that. I think Men of Iron is very much, it's a good, I don't want to use the word simulation because I think simulation is overused, and that's a whole other conversation. But I think for most of its points, it does quite well at representing what it wants to represent in medieval combat. So I think that having both these scenarios and playing them out. I haven't fully finished the updated map that I want to finish, but I've tried both scenarios, and playing them out really does sort of lend itself to, like, the French interpretation does lend itself more to that historic conclusion of how the battle actually went, whereas the English interpretation has the English winning every time, in my experience, right? And that's not what happened. So, so I feel like that's relatively accurate in a way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before we talk about the next battle or looking into the depiction that you've done in Vassal, there's a couple of questions that I would like to bring up. So Tim is asking if there would be, and I guess the answer is obviously yes, but would there be historical background more than in a typical Men of Iron entries explaining each of the scenarios?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna do a full sort of the standard explanation of each scenario, but I'm gonna have an annotated bibliography at the end of each scenario for the best sources to look at for each battle. I'm also going to be talking for more of that sort of, I'm going to explore that wider debate around each battle, because I think it's important to, especially when these battles haven't really been talked about much and haven't really been wargamed much. Like the fact that there's one book on the Battle of Moron, like this is the only book in English that covers this battle, and it doesn't cover it well, says a lot. So I think it would be quite nice to be able to add to that body of work, maybe, and add to that conversation. So I will be doing as much sort of historical work as I can.
And that's great to have historiographical discussion also, and talking about how to represent it in wargame format. Maybe one side question before we go back to the stream from Sam from Lord of the Board. Another amazing channel. There is a lot of other channels present in the chat. If you don't follow Lord of the Board, go there and subscribe. And that's a discussion I've been having with Sam. Sam wanted to get into hex encounters, but he doesn't know where to start, and he's really into the medieval side of things. And he's asking if it's maybe a good entry point into the series. I would just say one thing for context with Sam. What I told him is that we're going to do a teach and play first with him of Command and Colors Crusades that was recently released. I think it's a good step in, even though it's not a pure hex encounter. I think it's a great entry point. But then after that, actually, I think the Men of Iron series is not that daunting. It is extremely playable, and especially if we have someone who knows the system really well to facilitate the game. I think you might have a great. I don't know if the experience would be great, but you'll have a really great experience to what a hex encounter is when it comes to grand tactical scale and in the medieval setting, which you might actually quite enjoy. So a follow-up to playing Command and Colors Crusades could be to play a Man of Iron game, and we can find a battle that you feel excited about, and we can play it, and we can have Pierre facilitating the game.
I'm happy to.
That would be really fun. So just let me know if that would be
and I think that's the perfect way. If you've never played a hex encounter game, I mean, it was my first hex encounter game, and I did fine. But also, I had that buy-in of being a medieval studies student whilst doing it, right? Like, so I mean, there's a bit more of a buy-in there, maybe. And I didn't know what else was out there. Maybe Command and Colors would have been better for me. I think Command and Colors is the perfect one to step into. And happy to facilitating these games. I think if you play it for the first time with a facilitator, really, really helps you get into it. I think
it's the best way to experience it.
Yeah,
and
100%.
I would say something about that, Alexandre. So I don't have a profound dislike for Men of Iron. I have a dislike for DRMs. I think there are too many of them. But on the surface level, I want to like Men of Iron. It's just that a lot of time I feel like the small rules details sometimes, or forgetting DRMs, goes in the way of me having fun and having this emerging narrative that I like in those kind of games. So that's the thing. But like any kind of game, I think it's so streamlined that the more you play, the less you see it. So probably that's the thing. And I mean, Pierre is doing one, and Pierre is one of my favorite person. So it's like I want to play it. It's like because it's a nice
pushing through, Fred, and I appreciate it. Yeah,
it's a nice thing to share. And if I can play it with Sam, that would be also pretty awesome.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
No, that's great. And anyone in the chat, just reach out to me if you want to play.
Yeah.
You don't
and Tim is
not even just Yeah.
Tim
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
saying if you join the Homoludens Discord server, one of the perks is you get a free teach and play from one of our specialists, which is actually true. I think
It's
if you
actually
donate on
true.
Coffee,
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
the link is in the description. If you donate on Coffee, you'll get access to our Discord server, and there are a few Men of Iron experts that will be more than happy to teach you the game. So definitely that's something that you can do. So yeah, okay, Sam, I'll send a DM and we'll plan your Hex Encounter journey, and we'll do it together on the channel. And we'll start with Command and Colors, then we'll go into Men of Iron, and then we'll see if we can do something else, building up on that. Anyway, going back to
We're almost there,
the
guys.
battles. Yeah,
we're almost there. The lecture's almost done. So I like these maps. The guy did a map of every 100 Years War battle. A lot of them are wrong, as I've mentioned before. This one is wrong in that there weren't that many red English units. I really like this battle. I think it's such an interesting battle. It's not really one we've seen in, I guess, it's not really one anyone knows about, but it's not one you see in medieval history much either. It's a night fight. Like, this battle happens at midnight in like complete darkness. The camp of Charles Le Bois, who is besieging La Roche-Derrière, was asleep when Thomas Dagworth came in with, I think it was about either 600 to 1,000 men he attacked, and he attacked this camp of 5,000 to 6,000 French troops. You don't really see these sort of attacks by a small amount of men. And it is like this lightning strike where Thomas Dagworth comes in, captures Charles de Blois, and almost finishes the war right then and there. The war does carry on for a bit, and Charles de Blois does get ransomed, and it carries on. But it's so interesting to game and to figure out how to game, because functionally, in the system, it means that the French get like almost 24 counters, and the English side gets 4 counters to play with. So you have to be really, really careful on where you're attacking from, those angles of attack, and that's where the scenario rules come in to really accentuate sort of this night attack and how that affected the morale of people, how that affected the armor of people, because armor takes a while to put on, and you don't sleep in your armor, especially when you're besieging a town, And so that was fun to look into and to try and figure out how to put it into a game.
Yeah, that's a really interesting design challenge, I think, to make this exciting. There's actually a really interesting question from Simo here, and I think we're going to talk a bit about visiting battlefields also. So as an archaeologist, Simo is asking, have you looked at archaeological evidence to actually help you in the design of those battles?
Yeah, so I have. I've been to 3 of the 6 battlefields like 3 weeks ago. And then later this year, I want to go to the other 3. So I've done a walk of all the battlefields, and at the Battle of Moron, which is the last battle we looked at, I had a good walk in this sort of area, sort of south, if you look at the right map, south of where all those troops were, just to figure out what that area looks like, and sort of why the French and the English would have fought there if it was the French interpretation. And that was super interesting to get that idea of like, oh, these are open plains. You can't see that from Google Earth very easily. And oh, this is how steep this stream is. Brambilly Castle there that you can see, the small little castle at the river crossing, doesn't exist anymore at all. And there's no trace of it. So trying to find out where that was very interesting. And I had to look through, I think it was Arthur Lemoine's, basically, he had an archaeological thing in the late 1800s that sucked, like didn't give me any information, but it was useful to read and to look at, to know that like there is not much information here about this castle, about where it is, were people garrisoning it, how big was it, and why would the battle be here. So I haven't done any archaeological digs. And outside of my medieval history master's degree, I've not done any sort of specific archaeological work for these battles, but I have walked the battlefields, and whilst walking, I've been doing sketches of the battlefields, and I have been adapting them as I've gone to change them to be maybe a bit more accurate to how I would have thought it would have looked like 600 years ago, compared to these frankly pretty bad sketches from people who have not been to those battlefields and who have not been able to maybe read these French sources that I have access to.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Okay, so La Roche-Derrière, and Tim is saying that he actually playtested La Roche-Derrière and said that it was super fun. Did it change since Tim playtested it? Like, do you still iterate on the scenarios?
Yeah, I've tweaked some stuff, but not too much. That's one that hasn't changed as much, but I have tweaked some of the values and one of the special rules a little bit to change the activation of it. I mean, it's everything is obviously subject to change a million times before publication.
Great.
And yeah, winter courting. I've got a bibliography at the end of this.
Yeah, at the end. So I start your question. I will bring it back up and at the right time. Yeah.
So final battle we'll look at. I thought this was interesting because this is one of the battles that has been gamed in, like, this has been war gamed before quite a few times. The Battle of Auray. I've seen it in Vevictus. I've seen it in Vevictus like a few times, and I've seen it otherwise outside of Vevictus in different books. I think SPI had a version of it. Every wargame I've played places the location of the battle in a different area, which is bizarre. Like, it's the most famous battle. It's the last battle of the war. Charles de Blois dies in this battle and ends the war. So you'd think there'd be a lot of information on this. This defines who controls Brittany for the next 100 years, right? But we don't know where the battle was. I went to the battlefield 3 weeks ago now, and I ended up sort of settling on the western bank of the river. Again, it's a little weird because that's kind of a large flat it's a very, very steep rise up to a large flat plain. So it's sort of deciding to figure out if I want to place it there or if I want to place it somewhere else, and see if there's any further reading about the actual location of the battlefield. If anyone else has some, let me know. But I've got 2 or 3 different maps that I've been working with to try and sort of get that feel of the battlefield. What we can be sure of, though, what we can be more certain of is who was there and how the battle went whilst it was going out, because we have a lot of sources of how it went. And so that's been interesting to try and figure out, because there was a big a rush towards the standard, and the standard was really important during this time, right? Like the big standard of Charles de Blois. There was a rush towards that standard. So I'm going to actually, usually in Menevian, the standard is more of an abstract counter that's just there as a rally point. I'm adding rules for that scenario to make it have more of an effect on morale, on enemy morale once they capture the standard and go there, and how that plays out with the game. So that's been quite fun to tweak with. Can't hear you, Fred. Sorry. Yeah,
it's like a capture the flag mechanic.
Yeah, almost. Whereas usually the standard is this abstract thing that doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's quite funny.
And there is a comment from Molotov Kokatia that I think is interesting, and people don't necessarily realize this, but he's actually surprised that locations for medieval battles are disputed, even though it wasn't that far ago. We expect that they are disputed for medieval times, but it is also the case for ancient times, I mean, but it is also the case for a lot of medieval battles. Yeah. Maybe can you explain a bit more why that is?
Because we don't have, like, outside of archaeological evidence, they don't say it was like
they didn't have GPS.
They didn't have GPS. They didn't give you the coordinates of where it was, and they'd maybe describe the wood to the east of the battlefield or something. But 600 years have passed since then. Farmers clear woodland. There's even, I mean, the huge discussion in historiography at the moment on the 100 Years' War is the location of Cressy. A couple of historians have just recently, in the last 2 years, published huge volumes on why this other historian is wrong, and Cressy was here, and the other one has said no, it's definitely here. And the Battle of Cressy is this sort of foundational battle in British nationhood, like it's showing that we are stronger than the French battlefield, is what they're saying, right? So it's very,
and they tend to forget that they lose the 100 Years' War. They won that battle, and it's like it's this big thing. It's like you guys lost the war. You do remember that,
and then immediately a civil war followed, right? Like it's it's said a lot. But I would say not every, but like the vast majority of medieval battles are disputed exactly where they happened. And this is important in a hex and counter tactical game. It's not important usually where it happened exactly. If you look at the map, like if the battle happened a kilometer to the south, that doesn't really change much, right? Like it's still just outside of Auray. There's still 2 hills. They're still meeting in the middle and fighting. So it's not really something that chroniclers of the time cared about talking about. It is really that.
The chronicle wasn't really that. What mattered was not to inform military historian from the future.
No, it was mostly to blow air up the arse of the king, who the chronicle was for. Like, that's it. Great. So I mean, second to last slide before the bibliography, I want to talk about just the design ethos of Men of Iron and Richard Berg. We call it the Bergian design ethos, where the games are weird, the games have interesting chrome, and key to me is the games have a core thesis, especially in this series. All Richard Berg designed games have this sort of thesis going in, and the game design with the dice roll modifiers, with the combat results tables, echo this thesis. And that's what I really like, right? It's not just this sort of like arcadey slap fight against two battles. Like he's trying to say something. Whether he says it correctly or not, whether he succeeds or not, that's up in the air, and I think a real matter of debate. I think there's some real sort of issues with some of the simulation. But mainly Men of Iron, which is also what Ermine will be based on, is about that rise of infantry, the importance of infantry on the battlefield. That's shown through the DRMs, that's shown through the CRT. Infidel is the importance of cavalry. Blood and Roses is how the professional organized medieval army, where like all of the unit stats are, for example, standardized across the board. You know, you won't have a line where mounted men-at-arms is slightly weaker than the mounted men-at-arms next to it because of their armor. In Blood of Roses, Richard Berg was saying during the War of the Roses, there was that sort of standardized strength training behind each army. And Arquebus has arquebuses, like it's got rifles. What do you want? Like,
yeah, that's the thesis. Yeah, guns. Yeah,
guns. And yeah, finally, I'll just go through.
Yeah, and I bring the question from Winter Quartering about, can you advise specific books? Yes, we can. So and Pierre is going to do it right now.
So yeah, Winter Quartering, you've mentioned Jonathan Sumption. His 100 Years War series is second to none. It's amazing. It's huge. They're huge. It's 5 volumes and they're all like 1,000 pages. They're not quite that long, but like they're big. Read it if you want. It's quite a lot, but very, very good. The Cressy War by Alfred Burns, I think, is maybe the most accessible English language book in the period. The maps are flawed, but the narrative is correct as it can be, but the narrative is very easy to get through. I think if you're naughty, you can get PDF for free online, but otherwise it's very accessible in secondhand bookshops. It was published in the 70s or 60s.
No piracy here.
no piracy, but like on university websites they have that. There's princely power in late medieval France, which is more of a purely political look at the conflict, which I find interesting from the point of view of Jeanne de Penthièvre, who was Charles de Blois' wife, and she was the heir to the Kingdom of Brittany on that side. And it really shows from that point of view where like a lot of the time we're framing the battle, and especially I guess from Ermine's point of view, you wouldn't be like, I wouldn't blame you if you thought this was a war between John of Montfort and Charles of Blois, but really it's John of Montfort's claim against Jeanne de Penthièvre's claim to the same ducal throne. And it's showing that Jeanne de Penthièvre was a ruler in her own right. Whilst Charles de Blois was powerful, all of the proclamations, everything sent to her and from her that was official had her name as the first name, and then Charles afterwards. That's super interesting. So definitely read that. It's pretty easy to get into for an academic book, and very interesting. If you read French, the only book you need on this war is Jean-Christophe Cassard's La Guerre de Succession de Bretagne, 18 études. It's fantastic. I don't have a physical copy. It's only available in France in libraries, and it's unbelievably expensive on the secondary market. So if anyone finds a copy, let me know, because I can only read it when I'm in libraries in France. But it's phenomenal, really.
Which reminds me that I'm supposed to scan a few pages of another book, sir.
Yeah. And then Arthur Lemoine's de Bretagne. I think this is translated in English as well. It's very dated. It's 18th century, so don't use it as like the main source, but it's good as a resource, right? Like these old comprehensive 1,000,000-page tomes are quite useful, and some primary sources. And I think primary sources are really interesting because some of these are pretty accessible, like genuinely accessible. If you're interested in medieval history and you've never read a primary source because you're like, oh, it's all going to be in Latin, give the True Chronicle of John Lebel a go. Like if you read English, it's just been republished in this really accessible format. It's pretty cheap. It's like 15 quid. And it's really short and it's readable. And you see what John Lebel, who was writing at the start of the 100 Years' War during this time, doesn't go over the War of Breton Succession in super detail, but it's the period. It mentions some of the battles and it mentions some of the intents behind the battles and behind the movements, which is why it's quite useful for this. But do give it a read if you want to get into it and dip your toes into that sort of more maybe research focused side of history. And there's a couple more, but yeah. That's
Yeah,
that.
but I think that's already really good. So thanks a lot for covering this. I think maybe to conclude this discussion, I think it would be interesting to maybe have a quick look at Vassal and see
Yep.
how pick one of the battles that you just talked about, and then we can look at the work that you've done in making the map, and we can see a bit more of an illustration of how your research influenced specifically the design. By the
Yeah,
way, do you need playtesters? Do you want to do a quick call to playtesters,
I mean,
or
always new playtesters. We have a good core at the moment, but I think playtesting hasn't kicked off in earnest yet. I think what I need is maybe playtesters who are willing to really dive deeply into, even if it's just one scenario, but to play it like 4 or 5
over and over
times
again?
and
Yeah.
give good feedback for that. That's what I need at the moment. I think I've got enough people who want to sort of dip their toes, see how the game's going. And if you want to just do that and dip your toes in, see how the game's coming out, absolutely, that's fine. Definitely do. That's totally fine. But if you, what would be really useful is that sort of more core base. Let's look at the Battle of La Roche-Derrien.
And just to be clear, this is playtest art, right?
This is fully playtest art. Yeah. Oh god, yeah. This is fully playtest art, so I apologize. But you can see shock horror. There is terrain.
So I think what you can do is probably you see the text box on the top. You can reduce it.
Oh yeah,
quite a lot. Yeah,
that's
and
about what
it should
we
be
need.
fine. Yeah.
So as you can see for this one, we have Thomas Dagworth and his men in the top right. They've got 4 guys, and they're attacking. Essentially triple the amount of men on this side. I'm considering adding more French people here because the English usually win the scenario, and more French people would be quite fun to see if they can do anything. There are what I like as well as a note for people who know Men of Iron in Berg's designs. Everyone has their own coat of arms, and I want to have that again with their own coat of arms rather than just the English coat of arms. But anyway, yes, so you can see that the horseman here will need to decide how to approach Charles de Blois, who is here. His men start disordered. They start basically at a weakened state. But the horseman here, he only has 2 mounted men-at-arms and 2 mounted archers. And these archers can't shoot on horseback. They have to dismount and shoot. So it's it's not like a Mongolian horseman or anything. I think it's quite a tough nut to crack as the English.
Yeah.
But if you know what you're doing, you can usually win as them, which is what I quite like in maybe a war game. And it's kind of a challenge for the French to actually win as well. If you want, as the English, you can sally out with your city watch here. Richard Totsam rushed out and attacked Charles de Blois from the rear when he heard that there was a battle going outside. A lot of interesting stuff. And all of these characters, Jean de Beaumanoir and Guy de Laval, all appear in different battles all over the place.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
And it's fun,
It feels like you could almost do a bit of journaling, like pick one character and actually talk about what happened to them.
Exactly.
And I think Bertrand du Guesclin is such a fascinating character that you could actually do it with him.
I mean, for context, people who don't know, Bertrand du Guesclin in France is called the Eagle of Brittany, and in England is called the Black Dog of the Brocéliande, which is the forest.
Which is a pretty awesome,
sick name, right?
Yeah, pretty sick name. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's nice. The beige and the brown. So the brown is actually a town. It's La Roche-Derrien. It's the town of La Roche-Derrien. It's impassable for some of these troops, and it's being fired upon by catapults. Whereas the beige is a sort of hill that it's on. South of it is another little castle, and there are some forests as well around here that are. I mean, you could make a case for sort of trying to hide in the forest because remember, this is the middle of the night when this battle happens. So fully middle of the night, you can decide where you want to attack from. If you want to attack from the south here and roll up the lines as you go north, you can bring Dagworth over here in the forest. I like to give that freedom, like I think that's interesting. Rather than maybe starting like your horseman 2 feet away from the enemy. I think that's less interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think it looks like a really fun scenario. Actually, would be curious to try it out on the server. Yeah,
sure. It's quick as well. It's like half an hour if you know the rules. So
it looks like I like when games like this have some scenarios that feel like puzzles, and you're trying to figure out how to, you said how to crack the nut. I think it's I like when it's like
and
this.
this is the smallest one as well for context, just
Yeah.
in case
And
people think there are smaller ones than this. Yeah.
It's the thing that I like, for example, about table battles from Abel Holland, where it focuses purely on the nut. You just have a nut, and which is really, really cool.
Which is fascinating, and it's really nice to see. It's really cool to see that some designs actually go that direction. I think it's a space maybe a bit unexplored in pre-Napoleonic stuff in games. Yeah.
No, but that's very cool. So if you want to support the design or development of this game, not the design but the development, you can reach out to Pierre. How can people reach out to you, Pierre?
Well, my email is actually on the GMT page for the game on the P500 page. So do visit it and pre-order and email me if you want. Also on Discord, Pierre VJ, just find me there. You can message me there.
And if you join, if you support the show and join our Discord server, you'll find
the easiest way. It's probably the easiest way is just to join the Discord server.
And but that was great. Thanks a lot, Pierre, for taking the time talking to us about this. I think it's really super exciting, and it's fun to talk about the historical research side of things behind the design. Before we close this, I just want to say that the Euro War Games book is out. So all the people who pre-ordered it should have received it or should receive it in the next couple of weeks. So that's the first thing. And I happen to have an additional author copy that I will make people win, but I will publish the rules and open it to people who are on the Discord server. So if you want to have a chance to win one copy of this book, you can join us on Discord. And once again, to do that, you can donate on Ko-fi, and the link is in the description. There is one question from Molotov Kokatiel, which is always kind of tricky. Any idea when this will be out? I mean,
well, there's Purgatorio first, which is the next entry in the Medivine, and then this is the one after that. So I think Purgatorio will probably be out end of this year, start of next year. And because this one started development a while ago, it'll probably be a few months after that, maybe mid next year, I would say is the optimistic. I think there's a good chance of that, but I mean, it's almost there. But
And when the game will be out, we'll have another show where we can actually play some of the battles and see the final art and everything. That would be
Thank you, Simo and Winter Courting as well. That's really
it was great. So thanks a lot for the people who are in the chat asking awesome questions. I hope it got you excited about the game. I think it even for the historical research behind it, I think it looks like it's worth it. So even if me you don't like DRMs, you should definitely still pre-order the game to read the booklets. So that's but maybe just to close, one final question. So that's probably going to be your first published design, but what are you working on for the future? Because I guess you're not going to only do one game and disappear.
One game, then I'm out,
and then you're done.
So I've got a different game already designed about the Battle of the 30, the combat of the 30 during this period, which is again only 60 people, 30 on each side. That's potentially going to be published at some point. A publisher is interested, but I haven't got much sort of feedback about when that will happen. And otherwise, I'm mainly looking into Napoleonics, and especially the sort of pre-Napoleon Napoleonics, like early Revolution. Thinking about the Vendée a lot, and a potential game in that, and I think that will be very interesting. And Fred will be will be helping me with this.
So at least scanning pages for Pierre. Because this is not an easy book to find outside of France. But I started reading it actually. It's a very, very good resource, super interesting. So I hope it will help. And we need more games on pre-Napoleonic. I think it's quite interesting.
Big gap in that,
Definitely. But that was awesome. If you want to see more of Pierre, I think you're going to be back in a couple of weeks for our second session of Legion of Honor. So that's what's coming up next. Next Sunday, we are going to have... what are we going to have? Teach and Play with Dan Thoreau and Joe Dewhurst of Pax Transhumanity. And then on Tuesday the 28th, I'm going to be with Justin from Juste Garde, playing a game of the Library of Napoleonic Battles. So we're gonna play a battle of Napoleon's Last Gamble. So that should be quite fun. And at some point, Sam from Lord of the Board should be on the show to play Command and Colors Crusades. Let's find a date for this. And now I know that I need to also have Sam once again to play Men of Iron with you, Pierre. So we're going to see a lot of Pierre. Do you know when the next episode of We Intend to Move on Your Works is going to be out? For those people who don't know, We Intend to Move on Your Works is a podcast series that is published by Homo Ludens, that is made by Stuart and Pierre, and they go through the American Civil War chronologically, playing a lot of different war games, talking about those games, but also talking about the historiography and also the depiction and the Lost Cause myth and its prevalence in those games. Super exciting podcast. But when is the next episode?
So Stuart recently moved to Korea and then got very sick straight afterwards. So he's better now. So we're hoping to finish up. We got maybe three quarters of the way through a game. We're hoping to finish it and then record it straight after. So hopefully within the next month or so, but I can't make any promises.
Yeah. But it's just to say to people, if you're a big fan of We Intend to Move on Your Work, it's going to come back. And there are a couple of podcast projects that are going to come up this year on Homo Ludens. So you can also follow us on any podcast services that you have. It's called Homo Ludens Podcast, and you're going to have some stuff over there. Cool, but great. That was awesome. Have a great evening, everyone. See you in a week from now. And have fun. Play well.
Thanks.